Coach Steven, it seems like everyone is leaving carnivore nowadays. At least that's how people on social media will make you think of the situation. How much have you actually seen about this online in your perspective, your experience?
Well, I've had people send me videos to watch, and when I go to watch those videos, apart from tutting a lot, I read the comments, and there's a lot of people in the comments don't think it's a good idea. They're saying if I add carbs back, even if it's a small amount, it's going to trigger addictions. Carnivore got me to where I am, and I'm never going to change.
Hmm.
So I don't think it's actually resonating with the public as much as some people would like me to believe. And also, people have asked me to address some of the misunderstandings, which still I cannot believe people put so much faith in the A1C. It's
Oh
gobsmacked.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah, yeah,
yes,
yeah. Yeah, well, most of the stuff, most of the claims that we're hearing, I mean, it used to be, oh, it'll cause electrolyte imbalances, it'll cause heart palpitations, it'll give you headaches and all this stuff. And now this time around, it's always like it seems like once a year or so. There's always just like once every year or two. There's just a period of time where everyone goes, carnivore's dead. Carnivore's dead. Look at everyone introducing carbs back in. But every single time, it's a slightly different reason. So now we've got weight loss stalling, weight gain.
hmm
Um, you're going to get diabetic. That's a new one. You're going to get
mm,
diabetic, as you already sort of alluded to with the HbA1c, but even fasting glucose, by the way, they're also mentioning that one. It'll drift upward. I saw one, Zane Griggs. You may have heard of him before.
I,
Maybe,
I,
yeah, yeah.
I find him hard to watch because his physiology knowledge is lacking, and he genuinely does not understand what the A1C is. Does not understand it.
No, 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 no. I mean, he'll say it out loud, and he'll say the words, and he'll piece them together, and it'll sort of make sense, and it'll make you look like it'll make you think, oh, okay, so he does sort of understand it. But whenever he actually tries to put it into practice, it's clear that
Mm,
he doesn't know what he's talking about.
yeah.
The the fast, yeah, yeah. So he's been one of these people. He posted, I think, an interview that he did with a conversation with someone else, where this person said that either their fasting glucose or someone else, one of their clients or something like that, whenever they were on carnivore, it went up to 130 milligrams per deciliter fasting blood glucose.
hmm
Now, I'm not one to completely dismiss claims like that because innocent until proven guilty. I don't want to just throw cast aspersions and say, oh, that sounds doubtful, so therefore it must be false. However, I have really big qualms with Zane's implications by posting that video that must be what happens when you go carnivore with every single person, because that is incredibly rare. I
mm,
think one of the most common anecdotes that we hear about is actually that fasting blood glucose gets better. It is ameliorating diabetes. So to pretend like the 1% of people is representative of the other 99%, that's a big problem that I've been having. But the other things that I wanted to talk to you about this because you're someone that's familiar with blood tests quite a bit, very very familiar with blood tests. We've gone through this before, and we'll be going through some other things as well. But for people that haven't heard from you before about what your thoughts are, the facts are really about the HbA1c test and the nuance behind that. Can you give a brief rundown as to why just looking at an HbA1c value alone in isolation is not sufficient to be determining whether you actually have a problem that would indicate you have diabetes?
Well, because it's an unreliable marker, and I've actually got a prop with red blood cell
Good.
because people are really struggling with the concept, and I actually don't understand that because it's a really simple thing. So, so for people eating lots of carbs, it's an okay test, but it's not a great test, even with people that eat a lot of carbs, because if you've got anemia, hemolytic anemia, you'll have an artificially low HbA1c. So, if you don't mind, Eddie, let me just very quickly talk about blood tests in general, okay?
Yeah, yeah.
And
Good. Yes.
give you a little lesson. I've genuinely done this for people so they understand. So, a CBC, complete blood count, is called that because they used to count. They used to look at the blood and count things. All right. Now, what happens is a red blood cell beep, goes through a scanner, and a reticulocyte goes through a scanner. Okay, and because of its size and a little bit of chromatography, we know that that is a red blood cell, and we know that is a platelet. Sorry, platelet,
Yeah,
red
yeah,
blood
yeah.
cell platelet. Now, if you have a platelet that is this size, it gets counted as a red blood cell. If you have a red blood cell this size, it's counted as a platelet. All right, so that's how easy it is to get the wrong readings. Now, when you talk about glycation, that is glucose sticking or bonding, I should say, to the nitrogen bases within the hemoglobin. So you've got a red blood cell that might look like that when it goes past the scanner, HPLC, so high-powered liquid chromatography. Okay, so and it would look at that, and it would count how many hemoglobin are glycated. But
Right.
that seems pretty straightforward. There is an assumption that that thing they're looking at has been around for 120 days. Okay, so if we assume that every single day one protein molecule is glycated every single day, and each one of these represents 10 hemoglobin molecules being glycated, we've got 120 hemoglobin molecules glycated because it's been one a day. So when you get that reading and you divide 120 by 120, you get an HbA1c of 1. I'm just using that as an example. All right, now
Right.
that's been floating in your bloodstream for 120 days. If you have anemia, and I'm doing this because I'm so fed up with people not really understanding it, and that's been in your bloodstream for 60 days, that's what it's going to look like. But the chromatography does not look at the age of the red blood cell, so they'll count that up and they'll go, oh, that's 60. 60 divided by 120, because they think it's lived for 120 days. 60 divided by 120, oh, it's 0.5. You've lowered your A1C, even though it's still one hemoglobin being glycated every day.
Mm-hmm.
So now, and that's how we know, because hemolytic anemics are told, and I had to do this, oh, you've got a great HbA1c, but that doesn't mean anything. We used to say that. That's what we're trained to say when I did hematology and my blood testing, because your red blood cells do not live as long as they should, and it's a calculation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then you get people that will say, well, look, I've got CGM. This was about 6 years ago. I noticed this when I was really getting a lot of carnivores, and they were saying, I don't understand, my HbA1c is going up. And I thought, oh, hang on a minute, this can't be right, because their fasted glucose, their insulin, their C-peptide is all very low. Doesn't make any sense. So we started doing reticulocyte counts, which is what you do to prove hemolytic anemia is around. And reticulocyte counts are immature red blood cells.
Yeah.
Now, if you have a very high reticulocyte count, then you have red blood cells that need topping up all the time because they're dying too soon. If your reticulocyte goes down, then your red blood cells are living longer. Now, I am being patronising, not for your audience, but for people like Zane and Dr. Cyrus, who don't seem to even bother doing any research. And that's what's annoying me. So if you're making a decision based on your HbA1c, and you think it is just a measure of glycation, it isn't. It's a mathematical calculation flawed. And even the labs are looking at a HbA1c, adjusted HbA1c, where they then bring in the life of the red blood cell. That's the facts. There is no sort of opinion here. That's what happens. So that's partly why I wanted to do this video with you, not because I want to be horrible to people, but if you're on carnivore and someone tells you, oh, if your HbA1c goes up, maybe things are going wrong, that's misinformation. That is absolutely nailed on misinformation. That might have come across as patronising, but people don't seem to get it.
Yeah. I mean, it makes it, it's entirely important. It's entirely important. And in fact, this is urgent in my opinion, because this is a bunch of fear mongering. People are being scared, even people that feel good on carnivore. They're being scared that that they need to start introducing carbs back in, because then, they never experience symptoms. They felt the greatest that they felt in their whole life, in some cases, that they can't even remember feeling. And then they see a video like that and they go, oh, well, maybe I should get my bloods tested then. Maybe I should go. And then they'll look at their HbA1c, they'll look at their fasting glucose and go, oh, well, that's a little higher than, it's trending towards the higher range. Maybe I should get that lower by adding carbs in, which, I mean, first of all, on the surface, it sounds paradoxical. I'm not going to pretend like you can't do that, because insulin, glucagon, they all have regulations. They all influence those values. Sometimes in a paradoxical fashion. The question becomes whether you should be doing that. You're looking at a blood test outside of the overall context of the system while completely ignoring the fact, forgetting you feel better than you ever have. And perhaps in the situations where you felt a lot worse, your fasting glucose and HbA1c were in range. This is
Yeah.
the, this is the whole problem with, like, people forget the Hippocratic Oath. They completely forget it. It's, if a patient is presenting with no symptoms of any kind and no identifiable disease process, because it is true that just because you don't experience symptoms, it doesn't mean there isn't something lurking underneath. But if there's nothing there, nothing, then you are not only obligated to not intervene. If you yourself notice that in yourself, there's no reason to get a blood test done. Like, there's no reason to change your diet around, at least. There's no reason to do that based on a bunch of arbitrary metrics that are based on data from clinics with a demographic of people that are sick. Because who goes to the clinics? It's a bunch of people that are sick, and the very rare people that are like, oh, got to go get my yearly checkup.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
this is what the data is based on, and we're extrapolating that to people that are not experiencing symptoms. And for the people that are experiencing symptoms, this is where I actually wanted the conversation to go, because it's not to say that people they can't exhibit symptoms when they're introducing a carnivore diet into their bodies after years of not eating it. It's not to say that people can't experience weight loss stalling or poor thyroid function. So I wanted to ask you. I have my opinions on this, and I've made them very clear in public, in my rhetoric, in the space. But I want to get your opinions on at least some of these. So we talked about HbA1c. You've given your opinions, and really, it wasn't even that much opinion. It was just fact. What you just
Yeah.
gave was
Yeah. The
fact.
fact. Yes.
they're just absolute facts that we are ignoring a bunch of nuance that needs to be considered.
Yep.
But what about fasting glucose? So have you seen in your own clients, have you seen increases in fasting glucose? What is the highest that you have seen? Has it actually been indicative necessarily of a problem? Let's get into that.
Right. Okay. Well, again, you see people are falling into the trap of, 105 milligrams per deciliter, that's high. No, that's not high at all. So the studies are there. I've got that in my hematology pack of 10 years of blood testing. I know this inside out, back to front. So 130 milligrams per deciliter will elicit an insulin response. And people go, I thought insulin responded to glucose across the board. Yeah, it does. You have what's called a basal level of
Yeah.
insulin. And it is not affected in any way, shape, or form. It's just pulsatile, it's in the system. And if your blood glucose is 80, 90, 100, 105, 110, 120, 130, even the American Diabetes Association will back this up, and there are studies for this. Nothing's going to happen to your insulin response. Once it's over 130, then you get an insulin response. So when you're looking at fasted glucose and you're fat adapted, and that's really crucial, it will go up because there is a certain amount of glucose that's required in the body, mainly for red blood cells. We're making 2.5 million red blood cells every single second. We're recycling 2.5 million every single second, and they rely on glucose. People say, oh, you don't need that much glucose, really. Well, you do for red blood cells. They need it. Okay, so that's where your gluconeogenesis is coming from.
Most of it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Lactate
most of it.
from the,
Yeah,
yes, exactly.
yeah. Nice
Exactly.
little, a wonderful recycled system. So
Hmm.
when your fasting glucose goes up, and I've definitely seen that. That's because you're fat adapted. So the cell is replete with fatty acids. Where's that glucose going to reside? Well, it's not. It's not actually going to go into your fat stores. It's going to be in your bloodstream, because up to 130 milligrams per deciliter, that's easy. That's okay. It's not a problem. When we're talking about the volume, what does that actually mean? 130 milligrams per deciliter. And I'll tell you how crazy all this stuff is, because we'll look at just having 50 grams of carbs, the difference it makes. When you're up to there, that's pretty good. That's cool. You're getting no big biphasic response from the pancreas, from beta cells. That's okay. Right. Fasting glucose will go up because the bloodstream is still putting the glucose residing there, nowhere else. It's not going anywhere else, because the very reason is because there is not an insulin response. That's
Right.
the whole point.
Exactly. Yeah.
So there we go. So the GLUT2 transporters are fired up and doing what they need to do, which doesn't need insulin, and the body is being homeostatically controlled.
Right.
And this ridiculous stuff. Anyway, right, yeah, I've answered your question. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say the 130 milligram per deciliter figure is actually taught in biochemistry classes for clinical
Yes.
significance. You're actually taught that. I
Yes.
learned this years ago when taking it. Years
Yep.
ago.
And
And
180 milligrams per deciliter is when the kidney will start putting sugar in the urine. We know that.
yep.
That's seen time and time again. Now, also, the proviso here is this is based on what you just said, the population that eat 45 to 65% carbohydrates.
Yep.
I think those barriers are actually going to be higher if we could do studies on carnivores and we could do the studies to see, oh, hey, when do we start getting the big insulin response or biphasic response? I think it would be higher. I have no proof of that. But what the proof we do have keeps people in the right limits.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's always the problem with the area of nutrition science in the first place, and not even just nutrition science, but all of medical science. You're studying populations that have completely different phenotypes from people like us. We're the abnormal in this situation. We are abnormal. It's a sad fact that we're abnormal, but we are abnormal. The normal people are the ones that, yes, as you said, they're eating carbohydrates every single day, regularly. And so their figures, I mean, even if you find the average amount, like 180 milligrams per deciliter is where, sugar is starting to get put into the urine because it's actually toxic to the extremely toxic. You're getting to an extremely toxic level. Plus or minus a very small standard deviation in the samples that you're studying. Well, I mean, that signal, that mean could very well change, even perhaps lower or upward, depends on the circumstances in a carnivorous population or a diet or a population of people eating a carnivorous diet. So all of those figures can change, but it is nevertheless, yes, as we discussed, it's an established fact that insulin, it's not sort of a commensurate phenomenon, insulin release, like commensurate with the unit of glucose in the blood. You'll get a
No,
commensurate
yeah,
amount of insulin in the blood.
no,
That's not exactly how that works.
no,
There's many factors at play there, and even in a standard American, that's not how that works. That's not
no,
how that works. So that's that's something that needs to be addressed as well, because of course, for the same reasons that we're covering this, people are afraid that if their fasting glucose is going up, that that's the cause of perhaps their weight gain or weight stalling, if they're having that, or they're having this is where actually this is a side comment that I wanted to make, an additional comment. They think that they're experiencing higher glycation rate, which isn't necessarily the case because we already covered, like when you're looking at HbA1c value, that's even weaker of an inference. Next to that, above that would be fasting glucose, sure. However, you have to look at the glucose regulation patterns. Like, is it spiking and then troughing,
yep,
spike, trough, spike, trough?
yep,
Or is it a flat line like we were discussing? Now, this is a very trite point in this space, but I mean, many people look, it doesn't seem like people like Zane actually understand this. So I'm going to, as you said, I'm gonna emphasize it. But I think something else that we can cover is the significance and the utility of the fructosamine assay as well to get a better inference about this, because then you actually look at things like glycated albumin. You actually look to see if your tissues are being glycated at a higher rate. Um,
yes,
I think that a composite inference is way better here. Like if you're going to look at an HbA1c value, look at HbA1c value, continuous glucose regulation, not even just the fasting glucose, because that's a snapshot in time. So
hmm
what's the regulation look like? The fructosamine assay, and then reticulocyte production rate. All four of
yeah,
those. That gets a way better picture. That forms a way better picture. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
yeah. I definitely with the C peptide, I think that's really helpful as well. And
Yeah.
amylin production, which is in the same vesicle. Anyway, I just want to do something that just to get across averages how misleading they are. So I have two people, and they come in and they say they've got 100 milligrams per deciliter average, and then we look at their day, and one person has it going up to 150, dropping to 50, 150, dropping to 50, up to 150. Average 100. And now I can have somebody 105, 95, 105, 95, 105, 95. Right. So you talking about glycation. Yes,
hmm
the average is 100, but you can get much faster glycation rates at those peaks. Now,
Oh yeah.
isn't it crazy that there's no joined up thinking because they're worried about the glycation rate and they're adding glucose, the very thing that causes glycation. And you're
Yep.
also saying maybe try 50 grams of carbohydrates. Now, theoretically, if we didn't have all these wonderful defense systems to stop it being toxic, that 50 grams is equivalent to 1,000 milligrams per deciliter.
Yep.
That's
Yeah.
huge.
Very
That is
very good
huge.
point. Very
Yeah.
good point. Yeah. Uh huh. because we've got like a teaspoon going through our blood at all times. And by the way, when we say our blood, just like we were just talking about, that's actually based in a population eating lots of sugar. The
Mm,
baseline that's actually achieved is around a teaspoon. It seems to be slightly less even in carnivores that have been studied, because they actually require sometimes, because of course, as we've discussed, sometimes it can go up, but other times you've got I think Ben Bickman has actually brought this to light before. Sometimes you actually need less glucose in the bloodstream because you're not using as much for oxidative purposes. So there's even some variance depending on the type of carnivore you're studying. We
mm,
covered this in our previous discussion regarding, if some people they'll bump themselves out of ketosis after they eat a carnivorous meal, but you did a study on yourself that shows that you actually go into deeper ketosis. So there's
mm,
even some variance depending on the type of carnivore you're studying too. Nevertheless, though, it doesn't change the fact that these things, as I've emphasized multiple times, we need we need to discuss the nuance behind things for to get to your point, to get your point about averages, how misleading they can be. This is a basic statistical fact. You learn this in statistics. You learn what an average is. It's sort of the balance point of your data. Okay. You understand you learn when to report the median or the mean, because sometimes you get a lot of variation or really a lot of skew in your data. But the one thing that it cracks me up, because if people just understood this one fact, they would think it would open up a whole new world of logical deduction, and they would just be able to understand things a lot better. Specifically in this regard, relevant to this is the HbA1c value, the average blood glucose reading over the course of 2 to 4 months. The standard deviation, the variance around the average. What is the variability? What is the dispersion around the average? When you report an average in statistics, if you don't report a standard deviation alongside that, any data analyst, any statistician will look at that and go, I need more. I need
yeah.
more than just an average, man. And so, what do I mean by this? Well, you can have two groups. Let's say that you're looking at the average sugar consumption in the groups per day. One group can be exhibiting, they could be like fully identical. Let's say that in a world where you could just repeat the study over again in the same group of people, you can time travel, go back in time, do it again. And you could do a study on two groups of people that are completely identical to each other. And one group says, oh, well, it shows that their average blood glucose, or not blood glucose, but sugar intake is 200 grams a day. And group two, the average is also 200. Okay, well, it looks like, oh, well, they have the same average sugar intake. It's totally fine. They're basically the same. Except then you put the standard deviation right next to it, the variance, like plus or minus what? What is the
Mm,
variance around that? Well, one group one, can be 200 plus or minus 20.
mm, yeah.
The other group can have 200 plus or minus 200. It's like,
Mhm,
oh, well, that's a totally different picture then. There's a lot of variability in the second group compared to the first one. And so this is exactly what your point is about the HbA1c. You've got the same average, but the variance is nothing.
mm,
It's almost nothing in the carnivores that you're observing. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. This is coming from people that you deal with.
mm. Yeah,
Like these are
absolutely.
blood. Yeah, you've seen this, you've witnessed this, you've observed this, and so if people just understood that one fact, I mean, it kind of just undermines the whole argument. Then the reductionist argument of it's sufficient to look at an HbA1c value in isolation. Done. Slam dunk. Oh, well, you're going up to 5.7% HbA1c. I mean, this is people. I think that people just neglect to understand. They neglect to mention nuance, but it's not even just a matter of failing to understand it. They don't have a desire to understand it,
Mm,
because I think this really gets into the main heart, the heart of this, which is it seems that every single person is looking for an excuse to add in that fruit, add back in that
yeah,
honey,
yeah,
add back in the maple syrup, or whatever it may be, potatoes, sweet potatoes, rice. And
mm,
I think that's what it is deeply rooted in, whether they realize it or not. I think it's way easier to see that from the outside looking in than it is for the addicts themselves. Like
yeah.
I've
I think.
never, yeah, no, go ahead, go ahead.
Well, I think also there's a lot of, if you keep hearing that the HbA1c going up is a problem, you start to worry, and then the people that I have watched the videos of, they definitely undereat. That's a big.
Yep,
That's likely to make you gain weight. That's definitely true. And they have no joined up thinking. I just want to go back to the mean, the average, and stuff like that, and the statistical power and everything.
yep,
The example I always use, and this is one of the things that I was taught very early on was you can have 9 Americans sitting at the bar, and you can say, what is their average income? And it's $100,000. And Bill Gates comes and sits on the end, and you then say, what's the average there? And apparently the average American will be earning $335,000 million. So
Yeah.
it's all about looking at the actual details, the power of the study that you've done, because people don't understand those phrases. So that American thing, if you took the city of New York and added Bill Gates afterwards, it wouldn't make that much of a difference. Actually, it still would, because he's earning
Yeah.
an
Right.
extraordinary amount of money. But, we have to look at the way we eat and what we need and physiological parameters that we actually understand. I mean, the latest thing I've just seen is the polyol pathway. Oh, we don't want to elicit the polyol pathway. My blood glucose was 105 milligrams per deciliter. Well, you won't elicit it. Just do I mean, honestly, I did a Google search. It took me 30 seconds to find out, when does the polyol pathway become a problem? And that's at 7 millimoles per litre, which I knew anyway, 126 milligrams per deciliter. So this person is thinking about changing the way they eat because someone has said, oh, you don't want to elicit that because when you're at 105 milligrams per deciliter, that's a problem. It isn't. And this is what gets me. None of the information is actually based on studies, statistical analysis that are known and accepted. And it's also taken from people who are eating a lot of carbs. So I think on carnivore, all those numbers are actually going to be slightly higher. But even with the
Hmm.
bad numbers, and the numbers that they are using to justify stuff, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And I think the terminology is really important as well. I'm not denying their experience. If they eat some carbs and they feel better, well, that's maybe a temporary gain. If they're losing weight, that's fine. But I think that might be down to the fact that they were under eating and now they're eating more. It might be down to the fact they're hydrating more, so their mineral fluid balance is improving. But it's not adding the carbs. It's not adding the carbs. It's what you were doing before. You need to look at, you need a bigger bolus of protein maybe. That will elicit a blood glucose response, not via the protein so much, but as cholecystine kinase will come from the small intestine, tell the alpha cells we need some glucagon, put the blood glucose
Bump
up,
it up.
which will
Yeah.
get,
Yeah.
and then that will get an insulin response. Well, we are always saying, I think you're the same as me, you need to eat an adequate bolus of protein. And these
Hmm.
people maybe weren't. They were eating too much fat. So you're
Yep.
going to have problems. It's a change in macro ratio. That's it.
Yeah. 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 In fact, actually, sometimes I don't even say that you're necessarily under eating protein. Sometimes I think these people are under eating food in general. I
Yes.
think a
Oh,
lot of
yeah.
times
Yeah.
they're just eating. It doesn't even have to do with fat or protein. Again, I think that yes, you're right. The protein has more of the significant effect that they're trying to look for, that they're actually lacking, which is why they're developing symptoms. But if they just upped their food in general, up both the fat and the protein, even irrespective of the ratio,
Mm,
just keep the ratio the same, up your food intake. I've actually been saying this. It seems a little like oddly specific and weird, but it's something that once I said it, I sort of said it like casually, like just off the cuff. And I had a bunch of people, and I still continue to have a bunch of people say, you know what? I realize I experienced the exact same thing. I noticed that I can get double the amount of protein in one meal if I don't eat ground beef or minced meat.
hmm
So a lot of times people are eating a lot of minced meat. And I go,
Yeah.
and then if you're going to tie it into the sort of ancestral consistency model, when we killed an animal and hunted one, when we hunted one and ate it, were we eating minced, like all the animal, just grind it all up and eat it that way? Like, no, we were eating actual parts of the muscle meat that are sort of, they're more integrated. You take a piece off.
Mm,
So you're not grinding anything up. You're not grinding all parts of the animal up into one sort of amalgam of food. Not to say that you shouldn't be eating ground beef. If you don't have any problems with it, then go ahead. But I was saying, that's one thing to consider, is maybe you're eating way too much of that, because I mean, we know that a lot of people, at least a lot of the influencers in the space, they promote a lot of burger patties. They
mm,
promote a lot of bowls of ground beef, which again, I'm not denigrating them for doing that. However, I'm just saying potentially that's a problem if you're seeing that you're ostensibly under eating on food. I had the problem actually a while back. I didn't have actual like serious problems, but I remember thinking to myself, I'm getting a little cold, like quite a
mm.
bit, like way too cold than I should be. And I noticed that I was like, oh, well, I mean, if maybe it is a problem. Maybe I should be eating more, but wow, this is really weird. Like, why can't I eat that much food? And then I start switching to steaks, completely
Yeah.
different story. I can get like, it's just completely different story. And so
Yes.
it does that, but those people would have thought, well, it's carnivore. It's
Mm.
carnivore, man. Got to
Yeah.
quit. Got to add those
T
carbs
your
back in.
your T3's tanked because of your heat. If
Oh,
you're feeling
yes.
tough, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, this
And
is this
all of
is
it
one
has to do
thing.
with insulin. All of it has to do with insulin. And like a T3 level going down is not necessarily indicative of a problem.
Not
Like
at all.
not at all.
Not
You
at
have to
all.
look at the thyroid numbers in context with one another. Like, for example, if you have really, really high TSH and then your T3 is just bottoming out, okay, maybe something's wrong. Usually you'll be symptomatic if there's something going on, by the way. But if they're all present in balance with one another, you don't just look at the absolute levels and go, oh, you have a problem. Obviously, if you're going to be exhibiting lower insulin, you're going to have less T4 to T3 conversion because insulin is the thing that upregulates it to upregulates the conversion process. That doesn't mean that you're going to necessarily have a problem. It's just based on arbitrary metrics. Like, it's really goes into the repeat argument. You should be measuring your body temperature and make sure it's a certain level because that's a sign that your thyroid is functioning properly because your metabolic rate is higher. You want a higher metabolic rate. And it's like, well, where does that rule stop? Are you saying that the faster the better always in every circumstance? No, you'd probably recognize, oh, well, of course there's a cutoff. You don't want hyperthyroidism. You don't want to actually like get into a too high of a metabolism. It's like, okay, so you say there's a cutoff there. Why are you saying then that the opposite, sort of the antithesis to that, isn't true, where the lower the metabolism, the worse always? It's like, oh, well, that doesn't work either. If you're going to say that there's a diminishing return here, you have to also say that there's a diminishing return on the other end. You can't say that the worse, the lower the thyroid hormone, the worse always. It's like that doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way at all. There's a lower amount. There's just amount, and sure it's a metric of your metabolic rate, but you shouldn't be saying that the function is linear and the more the better, the lower the worse. It depends on context. That's not how the body works. Like, it's just
I mean,
arbitrary cutoffs throughout the whole time or throughout the
well,
whole. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, the T3 thing does make me laugh because normally the people that are saying their T3 is tanked are also complaining about gluconeogenesis being stressful. One thing I always want to say to them is, you do realise that T3 induces gluconeogenesis. So you're saying on one hand, gluconeogenesis is stressful, but you want one of the main drivers of gluconeogenesis to be higher. So get your story straight. That's the first thing. Secondly, it's a physiological adaptation. It's not pathology. It goes lower because you need much less T3. T3 is absolutely essential in glycolysis, moving pyruvate across the mitochondrial membrane. You need lots of it when you eat lots of carbs. You're going to have
Yes, exactly.
less. And it's just one of those things. And also, I mean, the thyroid is remarkable because it's one of the few things that does the futile processing in the body. So it builds up and burns down and breaks down at the same time. It's anabolic and catabolic at the same time. And that's why it's the metabolic mastermind, really, because that's what it's doing. It's running these futile processes all the time. So we need adequate levels. And what is happening, your body is giving that feedback and saying, I'm a bit cold, so you need to eat a bit more food, which will, in the end, produce a little bit more of a response. And you will see your T3 be appropriate and get you to the right level of heat, of body temperature. But I do think
Hmm.
we also run a little bit colder because we have less body fat. I think it's one of the things
Yep.
as well. So
Yep.
I think one of the things that's getting me about this is none of it is joined up, and a lot of it is completely wrong. They talk about cortisol, for instance, saying it's a stress
Oh,
hormone.
yeah.
It's not. It's a
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
homeostatic. It's a homeostatic hormone. It's not a stress hormone. It reacts in stress, but it also reacts when it needs to bring your blood pressure down, your blood glucose down.
Exactly.
It does both, and it's not even cortisol that they're talking about. They're actually talking about the effect of epinephrine and norepinephrine. They're talking about that stress response and saying
Oh,
that's
yeah,
causing.
and that's unbelievable. That's unbelievable because I just reacted to a video from Zane, by the way. His name keeps getting mentioned here. It's actually coincidental because I'm not purposely trying to pick on him specifically, but he talks about how he was talking about, oh, not just cortisol is stimulated when you're on a carnivore diet, which, by the way, that begs an entire question as to whether that's a bad thing. Just as a side comment here, as a direct response to what you were saying, this is my main problem. Yes, cortisol is almost any distressing event is usually going to involve cortisol. It doesn't mean that every event that involves cortisol is a distressing event. That's not how that works. That's not how that works. So he wants to talk about cortisol. I already talked, I responded to that claim, but then he talks about epinephrine and norepinephrine too. He brings those up and I go, do you know any carnivores that are experiencing problems with adrenaline and noradrenaline? Or are you just, I don't understand. Like what, that isn't even a claim made in these communities of people having problems. It's always cortisol. And it's like, well, okay, that cortisol is a hormone that is critical to gluconeogenesis. It is a hormone that is responsible for the production of three primary gluconeogenic enzymes, the major regulatory enzymes, those being phosphoenolpyruvate carboxykinase, PepsiK, pyruvate carboxylase, and fructose 1,6-bisphosphatase. You learn that in biochemistry, like explicitly in the lesson gluconeogenesis, or the lessons plural, because usually it's split up into a few. It's a basic physiological fact. And oftentimes you'll look at these studies that will observe these cortisol responses in people that are adopting a carnivore diet. First of all, they're over short durations, pretty short durations. They're immediately transitioned. So there's no like transition period before the diet of like 6 to 8 weeks. They just are put on the diet. But also in some of these studies, you can actually see that the cortisol level, yes, it goes up and then it goes down. It's acute. It goes right back down. And so it's like, this is the reason why it's also important to assess the duration of time that the studies went on for that you're looking at. Because if you're looking at a study that went on for 2 weeks, can you extrapolate those results beyond a 2-week period or a 2-week tenure? That's not how that works. You can't just look strictly, like exclusively at that. So I'm glad that you brought cortisol up because, man, I'm glad. And also, if I hear cortisol again, I'm going to lose my mind. But
it's an adaptive homeostatic hormone. It's not a stress hormone.
No,
it adapts. And also, they seem to think that it's a primary driver of blood glucose, but it isn't. Glucagon is. They keep forgetting.
That was what I was going to say. Zane actually mentioned glucagon is a stress hormone itself. He called it a stress hormone.
Oh, my word.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So that must mean that insulin is also... Oh, no. So if they're the yin and the yang, so if he reckons... This is the joined-up thinking, straight off the top of my head. If that's a stress hormone, then insulin is an anti-stress hormone. Is that right?
Yeah, basically. Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't make any sense. It makes absolutely no sense. Glucagon is just stress hormone. But that's the other thing that I actually said in response. I was like, okay, well, glucagon is the prototypical catabolic hormone. Okay, insulin is the prototypical anabolic hormone. I'm glad that you actually just said the yang and the yin, because I literally have said it's the yin and yang. You can think of them as yin and yang because they have directly antagonistic effects. They basically do the exact same thing as the other thing, but the exact opposite, diametrically opposed to each other.
Yeah.
If you're going to say that prototypical catabolic hormone is bad and stressful, you must then say that catabolism is stressful. And in fact, he actually said that in the video. He said, well, catabolism is a, you don't want to break down anything. And I went, hold on, aren't you talking about losing fat? Aren't you talking about people that are struggling with losing fat? Mm-hmm. So if that's the case, then people should be getting fatter. What animal is designed to be consistently in an anabolic state?
None.
No animal. You're not supposed to be primarily in an anabolic state. Okay. That fact alone should just render the whole high carbohydrate diet, standard American diet thing just completely, it eviscerates the entire claim and eviscerates the entire idea. Because what's the idea behind that? You should be eating 3 times a day to maintain blood glucose levels, and you should have snacks in between, and fasting is really bad. And so you have to break your fast in the morning. You have to have breakfast because you fasted for 8 hours during your sleep. You really think that your body is stressed out during sleep because you're in a catabolic state? It's ridiculous. Yeah. It's absolute nonsense. Like, obviously you don't want constant catabolism or else you'll starve to death. Good thing that's not what we're advocating for. Like, good thing that's not what's going on. So anyway, yeah, I'm glad we got that out of the way too, because the whole stress hormone argument, and there's really no such thing as a stress hormone. There's just hormones that are necessarily involved in distress, which is usually epinephrine and norepinephrine. Usually those two, usually. But even then, there's probably circumstances that I maybe don't know at the top of my head where, in fact, they are not necessarily indicative of distress. But usually those two are the ones that are cited, except for the fact that that's not you're not seeing people exhibiting high levels of adrenaline and noradrenaline on a carnivore diet. Like, seriously, cite one person and tell me that that's a direct result of carnivore. You'll probably find that it's not if you
Yeah.
dig deep enough.
I suppose at a basic physiological level, what we're saying, what they think stress is and what it actually is any threat to the homeostasis of the body. Anything. That's what the body is looking at. So if your mineral balance is slightly off, that is a threat to homeostasis. So you have all these hormones to regulate it. That's not stress. That's just maintenance. Everything is maintenance of basically the balance, equilibrium. And I think to keep labeling these hormones as troublesome or we haven't got enough, and it's ridiculous. They're trying to second guess the body, and with not a joined up thinking model. They say one thing, and as soon as I hear it, I think, well, that's counterintuitive. That doesn't actually make any sense. Like I say, the T3 and the gluconeogenesis being one, called salt being another, not understanding the HbA1c, trying to fix a glycation problem by introducing more glucose is absolutely ludicrous. It's just
It
ridiculous.
is, because necessarily you're going to be spiking your glucose if you're going to be eating 200 grams of it.
Yeah,
Like, good luck trying to blunt all of the 200 grams by eating it with fat and protein. You might blunt it a little bit, but you're gonna get a spike if
yeah.
you eat that much carbohydrate content. Like,
And that's stressful. When you're eating 10 times to maybe 30 times the amount of blood glucose that your body really requires in its 5 liters of blood, surely that's a bit more stressful, isn't it? Than anything
yeah,
else.
well, and I think really that the word they're really looking for is distress. There's
Mm,
stress and then distress, because stress really just implies work. Like, my heart is being stressed out right now because it's working. If you want
mm,
absolutely no stress whatsoever, you're you're looking at a dismal um, consequence and result,
mm,
which is death. Okay, you want absolutely no stress whatsoever, the body will be dead. Okay, what they're really talking about is distress, which is necessarily what they really mean by distress. The distinction is counterproductivity. Distress is an amount of work being put in that is not met by an equal gain, an equal return. That's typically what we're talking about when we're talking about distress. Are you in, and usually, therefore, you're going to present with symptoms if you're in a distressed state, if you're actually sick, if you're plagued with pathology. And they're really implying these enzymes. What they're really implying is that these hormones, not enzymes, these hormones are distressing to the body. They're inherently indicative of distress. And then that just loops us back around to what we were already talking about, which is that's not the case. It is a hormone. Cortisol is a hormone. It has a purpose. It is active in certain circumstances. Like, that is not enough to say, that must mean that you're in a distressing state whenever but this is the level of logic that we're working
yeah,
with these
I know.
people.
I
This is
mean,
the
with
level of
cortisol,
logic.
that's why you got the diurnal test, because we can see throughout the day, it tends to look like a sort of ski jump, doesn't it?
Yep.
You know, we know that it's there, it's pulsatile, it's constantly going through, it's doing its balances and checks when it's needed. After you've eaten, goes up a little bit.
Yep.
When you've stopped, when you're sitting on a chair, looking out the
Yeah.
window, it will go down a little bit. But it's
Hmm.
still at that constant level, really. Um, Obviously, the early morning, the dawn effect is going to put it up a bit, but it's practical. It's homeostatic. It's it. That's it. It's not a stress hormone. Anyway, let's move on, shall we? Because going around the houses on that, I think.
No, yeah. So let's talk about another claim, and we talked about this in the last video, but it's become relevant again, and I want more emphasis being put on this, because more emphasis is being put on this by these people. So in reality, I actually don't want more emphasis being put on it, but we have to counteract it. Physiological insulin resistance, peripheral insulin resistance, as is also known as this phenomenon, whereby there's usually a distinction made, this false distinction made between pathological insulin resistance, quote unquote, which isn't pathological, but that's the one associated with, they have diabetes, they're overweight, they're obese, and they may have heart disease as well, all that stuff. And then you've got another one called peripheral insulin resistance. And this is, again, we talked about this last time, where someone that has abstained from carbohydrates for months, maybe years on end, if they decide to reintroduce them back in, which they shouldn't have done, but maybe they had a slip up, they had a little, they had like 100 grams one day or something. What can sometimes be seen is their glucose level will spike, and then instead of immediately troughing back downward, it might hold for a minute and then come back down. I wanted to ask you, I've written about this in my book. I wrote about it whenever I was 18 years old because I already heard about these claims and I thought it was silly then, and I still think it's silly now. But I wanted to ask you, have you seen this in your practice? First question, have you actually seen this in your practice?
No,
Okay. Do you do glucose tolerance tests on some of your clients?
no,
Okay.
because they're
Right.
irrelevant.
They're irrelevant. However, in our last conversation, you said that there may be like one or two people that you've done this before where you said, oh, you really are worried. If you're worried about your insulin sensitivity, go ahead and have a Mars bar and see what happens. Show me what happens.
Their blood glucose drops.
Their blood glucose drops immediately right after it spikes. Right.
Yeah.
So that immediately tells us that if this phenomenon is real, and I do believe that there's some people that exhibit it, fine. I'm not pretending like this can't happen. It doesn't seem to be the majority of people. Not from what I've encountered and the experiences that other coaches like yourself have said they've encountered. Okay. However, I want to cover on this phenomenon a bit because I think that it's really, really, really silly. This is the consequence of thinking that insulin resistance is a problem or a pathology in and of itself. It is not. Why does this show that this is a problem? Saying that it is a problem is a problem. The reason for it is because that phenomenon that I just showed, the spiking of glucose and then the holding, despite the insulin going up, and then coming back down after a few minutes or 15 minutes, 30 minutes, that phenomenon is technically a form of insulin resistance. Insulin's up, glucose is up, but it's not immediately being followed by a trough with the overarching influence being insulin getting the administration of glucose, ushering the administration of glucose into the cell. However, that does not mean that you're masking the symptoms of diabetes when you go carnivore. That's the claim that's made. Oh, you're not actually you're not actually curing your diabetes. You're not curing your diabetes, chronically elevated blood glucose, because in reality, the problem is insulin resistance. You're just masking the insulin resistance. You can't see it because you're not eating those carbohydrates. This is the dumbest, most ignorant argument that I've seen regarding the insulin resistance, diabetes, carbohydrate, carnivore talk. It's absolutely ridiculous. Cole Robinson was saying this a few months ago, whenever he was raving about the sugar diet, which we know how that went down. What happened to that? Remember that? It lasted for about like a week or two. Yeah, remember what happened to all those people? Did they start gaining weight back and then just shut up and stop talking about it because they realized that they were messing up and probably misleading other people? This phenomenon. I wanted to ask you about it and see if you'd actually seen it before. Have you at least heard about this phenomenon before?
Not
Have you heard of
really.
people talking about this? Okay.
Not really, no. And
I've been hearing
Okay.
about it for a few years. Because I actually first heard this from Paul Saladino. He would take on these
The
clients
thing
that
is,
were.
Eddie, I'm going to interrupt you. You're just giving me such good, people. You're citing great people. Cole
Oh yeah,
Robinson,
of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. I heard it once from Paul Saladino. Yes, the great minds think alike. Peripheral insulin resistance. Yeah. Anyway, he would show these continuous glucose monitor readings from these people that transitioned that he said were transitioning from a carnivore diet to his animal-based approach. And he was showing that they were having glucose levels they would spike and then they would hold and come back down. Spike, hold, go back down whenever they tried to introduce carbs back in. So this is when he was first starting to work with them again.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember he was referring to this as physiological insulin resistance. He had a conversation with Thomas DeLauer about this, actually. So again, more great names, right? So we're just going to name even more and more. And so I actually heard this from them first, and I was thinking about it, and I went, well, hold on a second. First of all, we already covered that this doesn't seem to be happening to the majority of people. But I said, at the time, I was like, well, maybe this does happen to the majority of people. Let's say it did for fun. How in the world does that mean that you should be consuming carbohydrates again so that you can actually have a spike followed by a trough instead of it holding? Because that's their philosophy. Their philosophy is, well, if you eat a bunch of carbohydrates after not eating it for a while, your tolerance for it is going to be down. You can actually see that because it spikes and then holds and it stays there for a while and then comes back down. And I go, well, wouldn't that just tell you to stop eating it?
Yes.
Don't introduce them back in. That your tolerance for something may very well go down when you stop consuming the thing. That would be like saying, well, this food caused me a lot of inflammation, so I'm going to cut it out. Now I'm not inflamed anymore. But now whenever I introduce it back into my diet, I get more inflamed than I did before. So what do you do then? Oh, I should eat it every day. I just eat it every day so I get used to it again. What the hell are you talking about? That's not how that works. No, you cut it out. You stop eating it. Yes, and I think in terms of mechanistic speculation as to why this happens, I think this is a consequence of lower insulin. I think what happens is when you have lower insulin, basal levels of insulin, less frequently spiking insulin, what you're going to have, so lower area under the curve really is what we're talking about. What you're going to have is, if you know anything about basic biochemistry, what happens with GLUT4 transporters? How are GLUT4 transporters regulated? They're not regulated by glucose, they're regulated by insulin. It's the only insulin-dependent GLUT transporter in the entire body. Which means, what does that really mean when you say that when it's dependent on glucose or dependent on insulin? In the case of GLUT4, what it means to say that they're dependent on insulin is that the rate at which they function, the amount that you have, both of those are dependent on the concentration of insulin. So if you spike your glucose after having no carbohydrates for like years on end, what may you expect? Again, doesn't seem like it's the majority of people, but if you're the minority, what might you expect could happen to that glucose level whenever it spikes up here? Could it maybe lag a little bit before it comes back down because you don't have GLUT4 transporters in the same amount as a standard American does?
Can I ask what level it was at, though?
I don't remember the specific level. I don't. And I'm going to be really honest with you because I know that matters. I know it does matter. But I'm remembering the geometric shape of it, the sort of up here. I don't know what level it was. That is a good question. It's a really old video from years ago, so I'm probably not going to have any luck finding it. But it's something that, I covered this years ago because I was like, this is just a silly, you might expect that to happen. You're going to have low GLUT4 transporter amount if you're having lower insulin, because necessarily the amount of GLUT4 that you have is dependent on insulin concentration. That is like one of the most basic facts about biochemistry right there. So I don't know. You can give your take on it.
I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying, but I think it might be that that level went to, say, 130 milligrams per deciliter, and it would have gone higher, but the body got it to that and was quite happy.
Yeah, maybe. That too. Because as we were discussing, we know
that is sort of where it's quite happy. And you could do other measurements. You could look at lactate, for instance, because at a 90-gram carbohydrate meal, you're going to make about 8 grams of lactate, and if that went up, that would show that the body is overproducing other things to try and bring the blood glucose down by making it into other stuff. But I think if it got to 130 and leveled out, the body's smart. I think it would say, okay, I'm happy now. I don't need to make more insulin than I need. And also you have got the other effects maybe. If it's from carbohydrates, you're not going to get so much CCK. So that's not going to get the That's not
cholecystokinin primarily from fat, actually, and protein.
Yes, well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
So exactly.
If it was a carbohydrate meal, you're not going to get that response. So you're not going to get the help from glucagon, which you then get the help from insulin. So there's lots of different things I'd love to look into. I think it's interesting.
No. That's it's like I said, the whole peripheral insulin resistance thing. That's another thing that these recent influencers have been talking about. Oh, well, carnivore is going to cause this peripheral insulin resistance, but that claim implies that this insulin resistance is a pathology, if you even have it in the first place, which is not. It's not true. It's not a pathology.
Doesn't sound like a pathology either. It sounds like an adaptive phase that the body's going through. It is.
And in fact, they have to admit that. They'll actually say that in their explanations. And I go, well, if it's adaptive, so what? What are you talking about? What are you making a big deal about?
Yeah.
That doesn't mean what they really attack it for is, you're metabolically inflexible now. You consume carbs, you won't metabolize them as well through oxidative means. You'll be holding that level up high before it actually comes right back down. And I'll go, well, what's the indication for metabolic flexibility? And by the way, that's the first thing I would say. And the second thing I would say is, who's to say that it isn't flexible? Because that phenomenon that I was just discussing, if you are someone that exhibits that phenomenon, goes away within like 2 or 3 days. So it is pretty flexible. 3 days? Yeah, that's pretty flexible then. isn't
Yeah,
it?
it is. Yeah, it is. I mean, your body
So
learns.
yeah,
If you do
this
that
is
3 days in a row and you get different results, your body is listening and adapting.
yes. So
Simple.
yeah, like it's all spectrum. It's all relative, flexible. Like,
Yeah.
what do you mean? Anyway, let's move on to another situation here, another phenomenon that's sort of been one of the primary overarching claims about carnivore nowadays, which is we can end with this too. I think it would be a good idea to end with this because I think we've gotten pretty much all of it. We talked about thyroid, we've talked about insulin, tightly intertwined right there. We already talked about that and how that is. We talked about the whole stress hormone argument. We've talked about the A1C. We've talked about the fasting blood glucose level. We talked all about that. I want to talk to you about the final one, save the best for last here, which we already touched. We've already dabbled a bit into it, but I want to put some more emphasis here. The weight loss stalling, so the weight stalling, and potentially weight gain that can happen on carnivore. Again, we know that there are clients that can experience these problems. Oftentimes, from my experience, not dealing with clients, but talking to coaches like yourself, they happen to they happen primarily to people that are transitioning that have already had problems before with weight management. So
Hmm.
people that are obese, overweight already, they could perhaps gain weight whenever they go, if they approach carnivore maybe a little too impetuously, or if they start losing quite a bit of weight, they can hit a plateau. And so I wanted to get your perspective on it as someone who has coached clients before. How often do you see this in your practice? Is it the minority of people? Is it a significant minority if it is a minority? And what are the major culprits that you see are probably causing it? And what do you do to fix that?
Wow, there's a lot of questions there, Eddie.
Yeah.
Personally, I don't see that very much. I have long-term carnivore, short-term, newly adapted, tend to get the results that they want. One person, it wasn't carnivore because their life was absolutely incredibly stressful. So they were going home, working at home on their laptop. They were actually worried about their weight not going off and a little bit of a gain, but their lifestyle was just not conducive for it. So they were in a stress state all the time. So that was that was more environmental. So they were going to bed, then getting up at 2 a.m. because they just remembered I got to do something for work. So we identified that it was disrupted sleep patterns. Um, some people gain weight, but they don't realize it's muscle and bone. So I had a lady complain that she
Mm,
was gaining weight, but luckily she'd done a DEXA. And then when she did another DEXA, she'd only put on a pound, by the way, and she was finding that difficult because she was expected to lose weight. But she'd lost 7 pounds of fat, which is
hmm,
not bad, and gained, I think it was 5 pound of muscle and 3 pound of bone in her 60s. So
hmm,
actually, it was incredible. It was an incredibly good result.
mhm,
Um, some people they can gain weight, which is when they work out, they overdo it, and they can actually see that result in belly fat, which I
hmm.
think is not great. Adding carb, well, if I've got anyone that's adding carbs back in, it always comes back to bite them. But under eating is the main thing. So when people first start, if they're not losing weight, I will ask them to send me a WhatsApp, and I'll show you what sort of things they do. So I'll say, can I have a mood and food diary? And let me get one guy. This is let's see if I can get one that just shows you,
Yeah.
which just shows you how it works. Um, good grief! Oh, there you go. There we go. So it just send the meals that he's eating and what the interval is between what he eats. He's maintaining his weight, and he lost 50 pounds. Got into his jeans. He's a 55-year-old guy. Got into his jeans that he wore when he was 20, that size, and then just said, "I want to maintain it." I said, "Okay, don't undereat. Eat till you're full, and satiated. When you're hungry, eat again. That's it. That's what he does." And that works for virtually everybody. But there is always mitigating things which aren't carnivore. So the primary one is
Hmm.
under eating because they're absolutely, they've been brainwashed, over the, I meant brainwashed, by the way, to eat carbs and eat less, move more. So when you come to carnivore, they still can't get away from that. Well, I've still got to I can't eat that much. That's no good.
Yep.
And they've been taught to be hungry, and use willpower. I'm like, no, if you're hungry and you fancy some bacon at 9 o'clock at night, eat it. Because in the long run, you're going to start listening to your body and it will work. If you go out
Yep.
into the wild, there are no animals tracking. It works, right? The only animals that are obese are domesticated animals. We've got to get back to being intuitive. Sorry if this sounds like a bit of a sort of call to arms, but in the end, it's really simple. It is really simple. We can regulate, and this is why I get so cross when people don't understand the physiology. We have everything within us to regulate everything. We are saturated by things that want to dysregulate us. Ultra processed food is a tough addiction because the companies that make that ultra processed food have scientists to make sure that it's difficult. So you're not failing as a person, but we're fighting a lot of misinformation. And I mean, that's partly why we wanted to do this video, because there is a lot of misinformation about adding carbs back in. It's not joined up thinking. The weight gain is a real thing for some people, obviously, but whenever I hear it, one of the influencers, I won't name her, but I love her to bits. She's fallen for this, but when she said what she was eating, which was 1,200 calories, that's not enough for her because she's very, very active. She
Hmm.
would have done better to eat more, not buy into the rubbish. And anyway, so
Yep.
to
Well,
me, it's that mainly.
yeah, well, that's very
I'm good.
interesting because people, as we know, it's very difficult to overeat on carnivore,
Mm,
and that's by design. It's very clear that
yes.
that's by design. Protein is very satiating. In fact, protein, I would say, in my experience, is more satiating than fat,
Mm,
but both are pretty satiating. Um, and so, I really, what I typically say is the only way that you're actually going to overeat on carnivore and have that actually be perhaps a culprit for you gaining weight or in the form of fat and water and all that stuff. Um, is if you're pairing it with a bunch of carbohydrates, if you're pairing it with a bunch of sweet carbohydrates, that's even worse. Or if you're putting a shitload of cheese on it. So
mm.
dairy can be a
Oh,
big
dairy.
culprit. Yeah,
Yes. Oh,
dairy.
yeah. Sorry, I missed that.
No, no, yeah, yeah. I wanted to touch on that. I wanted to touch on that because dairy's a big. I think people overdo dairy a lot in the space. Like
Yes.
they at least they can. Most of these carnivore recipes that are designed to, it's really ironic. And I'm not denigrating the carnivore space. I mean, I love the space. Obviously, I'm in it, but it doesn't mean that it's without its flaws. I think that
Mm,
there's a little bit of hypocrisy that can happen in the carnivore space where we'll make fun of vegans for trying to emulate a bunch of meals with their plant-based stuff, that they can't have anymore because they're vegan, like these watermelon steaks or something weird like that. And
mm,
yet here we are in the carnivore space. We're making a bunch of, carnivore pancakes, carnivore this, carnivore that, and it's all dairy heavy.
yes.
A lot of it is heavy on the dairy.
And this
Um,
is this is
yeah,
predominantly what I say. I mean, it's the odd chain fatty acids that's the biggest culprit. If you want a mechanism, because when we do beta oxidation, you end up with a 3 carbon fragment, and the
three
liver
propionyl
absolutely wants.
CoA.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely wants to
Hmm.
make glucose out of it. So there's other things. Obviously, casomorphine's making it addictive. You want to eat more of it. If you eat more of it, then you're not going to be eating the other things that you should be eating, like the steak, like the eggs, because you're
Yep.
filling up on the dairy. Um, Dairy is, yeah, I can't believe I missed that one, but then it's fixable, so it doesn't stick in my mind. The easiest way to get somebody to lose some weight on carnivore is take the dairy out, and that
Take the
can
dairy out.
even include the 3 cups of coffee, which they say is one, um, with their heavy cream. And one of the things I learned in America when I went over to the meat stock is, their heavy cream isn't just heavy cream. There are sometimes additives in it, which is not just,
Polysorbate 80. That's a
yeah,
common one. Yep.
yeah. So
Carrageenan.
yeah, oh wow, yeah, and that's really surprising that
Uh-huh.
slips through the net for carnivores because they're really into health. So I think that, yeah, I can't believe I missed that one. But like I say, and maybe it shows because I did it off the top of my head that it isn't a problem because if someone is saying, "Oh, I'm not losing the weight I'd like to lose," I immediately say, "Are you eating dairy?" And they're like, "Yep." I say, "Okay, cut it."
Cut it
And
out.
next week,
Yep.
yeah, next week
Hmm.
they're like, "I can't believe it."
That doesn't, and that's not just a problem or potential problem when it comes to weight gain. I see people like that they have like acne
Sorry,
still.
yes, Eddie. Sorry, can I just give you one example, which is really stark? And I
Yeah.
know this is true because of we doing the mood and food, so I know what they were eating. And many
Hmm.
people don't believe how powerful this is. this is a very lean person, you know. You could see her abs and everything like that. She still wanted to just lose that final bit. And she was drinking 4 cups of tea, because that's what we do in England, with a splash of milk. That came out of her diet, and within a month, she'd lost just under 5 pounds from that
Wow.
one change. Yeah.
Wow.
So
Yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah.
that's that's the power of dairy, and that was a small amount of dairy.
Yep. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I completely agree with you, and I've actually had I've been quite controversial in the space with my commentary surrounding dairy, because if you really think about it logically, if you're going to say that 13,000 years of eating plants hasn't been enough for us to be adapted to it, well, we've been eating dairy for actually a little less than 13,000. Agriculture happened first before we actually started domesticating animals. It was around the same time, but you're
Yeah.
talking like in some cases like 5 to 10,000 years dairy we've been consuming. And it's
Mm,
like, if you think of it that way, I mean, you can't hold two at once. Like dairy's fine, but then also the plants are fine. I mean, you could there's some nuance in that respect, because yes, dairy better approximates what we're evolved to have. Like there's less
mm,
carbohydrate content in a lot of the dairy, not milk and heavy cream. And, they still have carbs in it, but like cheese has is pretty low carb. Um, and then you've got many other dairy products. I mean, butter, for example, is a very common one.
mm,
And so I do understand that logic. However, I think that in my opinion, I think the biggest culprit when it comes to dairy is the casomorphins,
mm,
because I think that naturally it's again, I think that's the reason why you're able to overeat on like a bowl of ground beef. If you put cream cheese in it,
mhm.
oh, I can eat double or triple the amount that I would normally eat.
Yep.
And
Same
it's
here.
like, yeah. And I that's no coincidence. So I mean, you can absolutely overeat on fat and overeat on protein.
Mhm,
It's not that you can't do that. It's just that if you do it without dairy, without sweeteners, without carbohydrates, good luck. If anything, your risk is going to be more towards undereating, and that's what
mm,
I want to finalize with, because I want to bring it back to what you said about undereating. A lot of people are going to look at that and think that's really really ironic. That seems completely backwards. How would undereating food cause or result in weight gain, weight stalling, weight gain? And I'll go first, because I do want to hear your opinion. But I just recently talked about this, and I
go
want to
for
hear
it.
your thoughts on my opinion on this.
Okay.
I think it still has to do with insulin, but in a different direction this time. We all know that you can have too much insulin. However, I do absolutely believe that you can have too little insulin if you're not eating enough food. What does that do to your metabolic rate? Does it tend to lower it? I mean, it really does just go back to thyroid a little bit, because we're that it's sort of looked at as your thermostat for or your for your metabolic rate. Um, it all goes back to that. I think that if you're under eating, you're going to have too low of insulin. That's also a problem. And paradoxically, as much as insulin is the prototypical anabolic hormone, if you have too little of it, the rate at which you will actually be oxidizing substrate that you put into the body is going to be lower. And so I think that, of course, everything exists within a nexus. Trying to be reductionist and say that is the sole culprit. No, maybe not. But I think that if you're under eating, that very well could be the problem. It's too low of insulin. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, how does that make you fat?
Well, so the reason that I say that is because as much as insulin is required for the storage of fat, it's not like you don't have any insulin.
Mhm,
Even when these people have too low of insulin, I don't. They're not exhibiting an absence of insulin. And so what I'm saying is, if you're eating the same amount, but your
mhm,
metabolic rate is lower,
mhm.
then that could very well
Oh, I
be
see.
causing
Yes.
weight loss stalling, and then weight gain. Paradoxically, despite the fact that you're actually under eating, not overeating, because you're not matching that with how much the body's actually using. So if you eat a lot of fat, you can increase your temperature,
Mm,
because your fat cells can uncouple, and if you have uncoupled mitochondria in your fat cells, they actually release more heat because they're more inefficient. But that is dependent on hormonal balance. It's also dependent on how much you're eating and the macronutrient profile. It's dependent on many different things. What I'm saying is that is just one influencer over your metabolic rate. But if you lower it too much, if you can have two. How about this? Too much insulin, obviously anabolic state, chronically anabolic state, fat gain.
mm,
Then there's this whole range here, which can
mhm,
result in fat loss. You get too low, you can have an extremely low metabolic rate, and then that results in the whole poor thyroid function, hypothyroid and all that stuff. That you can exhibit it, but again, culprit I would say is under eating. We already agreed on that earlier. And so what I'm saying is that that's been my opinion on the situation. Because if you're under eating, yes, I think that is a primary mechanism as to how that can paradoxically lead to weight gain and weight stalling. Because obviously, if you increase your metabolic rate, I think that's why people on the sugar diet they had some fun for a week losing fat. They were stalling in weight loss, and they took the easy way out and they ate a bunch of sugar. But the question then becomes, well, why did they lose a bunch of fat? Now, I'm not saying that it has to solely do with increased metabolic rate because they spiked their insulin and all that stuff. They were also lowering their fat drastically, and they also were lowering their protein drastically. And
Yes.
and the measurement was also weight as an absolute term, not what the weight was made up of. How much muscle did they lose?
Mm.
All of that matters, and I'm not pretending otherwise. But I had always thought, well, I would say that it actually has to do with you got your insulin up. You got your insulin up, but do that the way that you've been doing it for this last week. See what happens. And we did see what happened. They did see what happened because they started gaining it back. So I don't know. I'd like to hear your thoughts on it.
Well, yes. Yeah, if you've got low insulin, my understanding would be that you would be able to liberate your fat cells, and
Right?
therefore it would be easier. I'm just thinking this through because I've not heard this before.
Okay.
So the absence of insulin normally increases fat metabolism, but what you're saying is you're not eating enough, and the other regulators are lowering your metabolic rate because you're not eating enough. So it
Yep.
isn't insulin on its own. You're talking about your
Right.
body as an overall regulator, and that
Yeah.
that would make sense. Yes, because insulin isn't the be all and end all. Because
No,
there
it
are
isn't.
other things. Yeah. So exactly. So again, going to what we said about eliciting, things like glucagon. We're not doing that because there's not enough food going in. Well, that's what we said earlier about the threat, the homeostasis. That's a threat. And what you do,
Right.
you're
Yeah.
gonna you're not going to give up anything, and you're going to store fat, amongst other things. Sorry if I'm not saying the right things for you, because I've
No,
just
no, no.
spoken.
No, no, you're
So
good.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it
So
makes sense.
we're basically on the same page. Yeah, because if your metabolic rate is low, I mean, I hate to lend credence because I'm not doing this. It may sound like it on the surface. I'm not lending credence to the whole calories in, calories out model. However, one aspect of that model, it's way too reductionist, and there's way too that's mainly our critique regarding it. It's way too reductionist, and also it's not. They like to say that it's congruous with the laws of physics when it's not, because you can't consume a calorie. You're not actually consuming calories, you're consuming mass. So we already know those arguments. One
Mm,
thing that actually is an element of truth to that is that, yes, how much mass doesn't come from nowhere. You can't get
mm,
fat without actually consuming something. Like you have
yes.
to consume something. And usually it's matched by the rate at which that is being utilized. The mass
Mm,
that you've consumed is being utilized. That's just the problem, is that they don't understand that the way in which it's utilized and how much it's utilized and all that stuff is dependent on hormonal balance, which is dependent on the macronutrient profile. So quality matters.
mm,
Um, and also the metric itself is wrong, as we already covered, calories versus mass. But if you don't counteract how much you're eating with the metabolic rate, so the amount that your body's actually using of it and what it's using it for, then you could very well store onto more of it than you otherwise would have. It depends on what your metabolic rate is. And if you're going to undereat, there's no reason for your metabolic rate to be high. It's not going to be high. People that have low metabolic rates it's usually indicative, therefore, necessarily as a result of that, of malnourishment, malnutrition. People that are starving have low metabolic rate. Um,
yeah.
and so, and by low, I actually mean genuinely low, like causing symptoms, like
Yes.
actual poor thyroid function. I don't mean low in terms of the metric and the normal ranges and all that stuff. That's not what I mean. But I think we're pretty much on the same page in that regard. I think that's probably what these people did, is they were eating because eating a bunch of sugar and then having yourself lose weight, even just within a single day, it's odd. And I thought,
Mm,
well, I mean, if you had really low metabolic rate, then perhaps that's why it happened. So I think we're pretty much on the same page. Yes, it's not insulin in isolation. Absolutely true. Because, of course, in a type 1 diabetic, what happens whenever they don't have like any insulin? Well, they actually waste away. And
yes.
they have a higher metabolic rate, actually, because they release a lot of heat.
Mm,
That's what happens to them. So it's not just insulin. I just mean a low metabolic rate is so you know what? You're right. It's probably an indirect. Insulin is sort of the third step in that regard. It's probably just too low of input causing too low of glucagon, too low of, all that stuff that you already mentioned. I think that you're probably right about that. But okay, so our thoughts align, which is a good sign. Um,
mm,
but yeah, I think that to finalize that, when it comes to the weight loss stalling, when it comes to the weight gain, yes, we talked about dairy,
mhm.
big culprit, a very common culprit. Um, Nuance regarding whether it's even appropriate for us to be consuming. Ken Berry is someone that says otherwise, and I tend to agree with him. I'm not saying I don't have butter. I'm not saying I don't have some cheese, but to make it a significant part of your diet, I'm not someone that really agrees with that. And then also the under eating. So
Mm.
okay, I think we covered it. So
Yeah, I
all
think
right,
that's one of the things that I did a presentation this year when we talked about weight loss studies, and they always study it wrong. That's one of the things I would say. And I actually went in and said, actually, we always, when we're looking at weight loss, we always do studies where people lose weight. But actually, we need overfeeding studies to see what makes people fat. That's actually what we should do. Because you ask your question, why do people get fat in this situation? So Sam Felton did do a study on that, but not to prove what you were talking about. But I found it very interesting because he split it into a low carb group, high carb group, a Mediterranean group, and the results were so stark. The differences between there was one of the groups that actually gained some weight because the whole point was to gain some weight, but lost inches around their waist, and that was a low carb group.
yeah,
But they
yeah,
still gained weight. So their composition was very different. Mediterranean. I was trying to get the figures actually, if I could just get that up, because the
mhm,
figures are really quite. Yeah. Um, so what he did, and this proves that calories is rubbish completely, because these were isocalorific experiments. So he had the low carb, high fat phase, which was, I know we don't like calories, but it was 5,800 calories in inverted commas. All of them were that. That's a lot of food, right? And at the end of 3 weeks on the low carb, high fat, his weight measurement had decreased by 3 centimeters, right? But his weight
right.
went up by 1.3 kilograms. So is that a person there that could be saying, I've gained weight? Or actually the body composition improved? See, and this is it. There's so much nuance. The low-fat vegan, by the way, in 3 weeks, the weight increased by 7.75 centimeters, and the weight gain
Mm,
was 4.7 kilograms, which proves the difference in uh, what you're eating. And when the low-fat phase, we were talking about fat compared to carbs, they gained 7.1 kilograms and increased their waist by 9.25 centimeters. Huge.
mhm.
So 3 times as much waist measurement gain and 6 times as much weight gain on low fat, and vegan was in the middle. So I think when you ask me a question like that off the top of my head, I'd have to sit and think about it, because I don't think it as I don't think insulin is as critical in that situation you just gave as all the
Okay.
other factors as well. If you're under eating, you can definitely gain fat. You can definitely gain weight. But
Yeah.
I think it's part of the survival mechanism as well. When there's scarcity, your body just slows everything down, brings its temperature down.
Exactly. Exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's
And so I think it all has to do with metabolic rate.
yeah.
Like you're not going to have an adequate or an indicated metabolic rate if you're not eating enough food.
Mm,
I really think that's what it has to do, and it has to do with. And I think that the primary culprit is actually protein underconsumption. I think people are eating too much
yes.
fat.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
really think
Well,
they're eating too much fat.
yeah. And that's my
Um,
second go-to when people are not losing weight. I say, "Are you one of these people that's doing a stick of butter? Are you putting
every
butter in your
day.
stuff?"
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, well, just take that out for a bit, or put your protein up. Oh, but I'm supposed to get 80% of my food from fat. I'm saying, well, don't, because it's
Well,
not
who? Yeah. Who
working.
said that? Who said
Yeah,
that? Like according to whom? On the basis of what? Yes.
right,
Exactly.
exactly. So I think it's. I mean, obviously, if you do that, then the insulin is going to be effective, but I don't think it's the driver. which maybe I've misunderstood what you were saying.
Right. Well, yeah. I think it can be reflected. It can be seen in like really low insulin bouts and low frequency of increases. That's kind of
Right.
why I was talking about that.
Oh, right. Okay.
But yeah, because typically people that are going to be exhibiting low metabolic rate as a result of undereating, they're not getting bumps in insulin.
Yeah,
They're
exactly.
not
Yeah.
getting that. So that's really, yeah, that's what I was saying. But yeah, we're on the same page there. So, well, Stephen, is it safe to say that you don't think that we should be adding carbohydrates back into our diets as
Not at
carnivores?
all. We didn't even touch on glycation across the board with all proteins because that would be my biggest concern. And people are not talking about the fact that you are glycating all of your proteins, albumin, collagen, all of them.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not just the HbA1c. That's just the marker. So every
Yeah.
protein that is bonded to a glucose molecule will be deranged, and it's
Yep.
permanent. It forms that shift base, and you're done, mate. That is a deranged protein in your body, and that's not good. And to gain some numbers is not good either. But that's
Yep.
what I would say. Don't
Yep.
eat carbs to gain numbers. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, yeah. Well, you heard it from Stephen, folks. Yes. Let's listen to Stephen and not listen to all these other inane coaches in the space right now that are telling you that you need to, cut out all your fat and replace it with carbohydrates and super lean meat and all that stuff because you're going to lose muscle and all that stuff. It's ridiculous. It's nonsense. So, Stephen, thank you for coming up on the channel to talk about this. I appreciate it, and we'll talk soon.